All right, that story by Catherine Imuraget sort of paints a picture of the green situation, especially amongst public schools across the country. And for that reason, we want to have a conversation, not just on that, but taking a look at the grade 10 transition and some of the hits and misses that have come up ever since that transition took place. It's roughly over a month ago. Even as the learners continue attending to schools, the Ministry of Education says roughly 97% transition rate has been achieved, which is still wanting, bearing in mind we were targeting a 100% grade 10 transition, which seemed to be an uphill task. And we saw the mop-up exercise by chiefs in local communities, even as the government gave a sweeping statement that, this grade 10 learners should be taken into schools and admitted, even without school fees, even without uniforms and such materials. So is it sustainable? We'll be having a conversation with education policy expert and advocate Ken Echesa, who's joined us in studio. Echesa, thank you so much for your time and karibu sana.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm happy to be here.
I know this is a matter that's really close to your heart, and yes. I'd like to begin with the chaos that we've seen in this 100% transition goal. That directive of not turning away any learners for lack of fees was given, and of course they clarified that this was not a waiver of school fees in any way, shape or form. But some argue that we're putting principals in a precarious situation. So what do you make of that statement? Is it sustainable?
The statement is not sustainable. And first of all, I want to correct the impression created by government that we have about 90% transition. Anyone who is keen on education matters in this country knows that the C4 schools, the previous day schools, carry the bulk of the learners. And if you want to see enrollment at any level of basic education, then just check out on the enrollment in day schools. They are nowadays called C4 schools. In our current C4 schools, they are experiencing the lowest enrollment ever in the history of basic education. Majority of these day schools have recorded less than 30% of what they anticipated. We have schools in sub-counties in this country, right from Marikani, go to Mumias, go to Kajiado, that have only received about 8 to 6 learners. You get 6 learners, and your projection, the declared capacity, was about 200 learners. And we keep asking, where are the rest of the 194 learners? The president gave a directive which was to be implemented through the CS and chiefs and other stakeholders that students, even without fees, should go to school. One, that statement was regrettable because the reason why learners were not going to school was simply not because of school fees. In this country, learners will still go to school and tell the principal, we are unable to pay school fees, give us some time. And principals have been patient. For the new entrants, grade 10s, former Form 1s, they're given the first 2 weeks to show some fees commitment. But learners who are forced to go to school without uniform, one, they stand discriminated from the rest of the learners, and therefore they are a marked lot. Number two, remember they are going to a boarding school where you require basic boarding facilities. You require a mattress, you require a blanket, you require a spoon, you have none.
Even food.
Even food. Okay, food, they'll say that the schools are African. They'll find a way of feeding you.
Even without capitation.
But then in the morning, you have no soap to take a shower. You have no essential clothing to take care of yourself. How are these learners going to survive in this environment? You are directing these learners to go to school at a time you are aware that you have not released the grade 10 capitation. On that day, the president said that over 40 billion had been released to schools. That was a lie because one, how did the ministry know the number of students who are joining grade 10 since the principals have not submitted the names of students enrolled even at the sub-county level? So at what stage they get the numbers so that the treasury could release their funds? So money had not been sent. What had been sent is the capitation for the students already in school. And these are just the Form 3s and the Form 4s under the outgoing 844 system. And even that capitation of the so-called 40 billion is just about 40% of the intended capitation that was sent, which was used to pay debts. And therefore, schools are straining, principals are straining. Unless we take our children to school to grow, then the presidential proclamation of learners going to school even without fees remains a fallacy and is not helpful in the intellectual world and towards creating a school generation.
Okay, we'll be talking about a sustainable solution, but you mentioned that matter of many C4 schools not admitting grade 10 learners. Have we truly walked away from the old divide between elite schools and those serving disadvantaged communities? Because this, many might argue, exposes gaps in policy implementation.
Actually, what we are doing is that we are widening the gap.
Yeah.
How are we widening the gap? Initially, the poor will take their children to C4 schools, the day schools, and struggle to negotiate and even pay in kind, pay in maize, pay in firewood. But today, even those C4 schools are not available for the poor because they are constrained in terms of the pathways that they are offering. Remember, all of them were forced to offer STEM, and they have no facilities to offer STEM.
Facilities, laboratories,
they have no laboratories,
workshops,
they have no playgrounds, they have no workshops, they have no essential rooms for the technicals, no music room, no farm for the agriculture students, no kitchen for the home science students, and so forth. So those C4 schools have been forced to offer STEM, which they are unable. So even parents understand that schools next to them in the villages cannot offer STEM because they lack facilities. They cannot offer sports science because now those are sophisticated facilities. The only thing they can offer are the social sciences. And those social sciences, they even strain in terms of teachers. Therefore, what is going to happen? We have seen preference for boarding schools, which are largely out of reach of the common man and the common parent. And therefore, we're going to witness a silent population of learners who have not gone to school at all. They are afraid of going to C4 schools because the schools are ill-equipped, and they are unable to attend C1 and C2 schools because they cannot afford them. And even if the president were to issue a proclamation that they go to school without fees, going to school is not all about fees. We have other essential things that a student must learn for completeness of definition as a learner.
Okay, just today, the PS mentioned that, for the need for fair, competitive and open market for school uniforms and other educational materials, regional and county directors were directed to enforce laws governing supply and purchase of school uniforms. And of course, this brings into the foray this conversation about the cost of entry. And it has been going on for quite some time, where the government insists this is the amount needed to join. Yet, when parents actually go to take their learners to schools, the amounts are quite different in terms of an increment. What do you make of this issue about sustainable learning and the costs of entry in such schools, especially grade 10?
It demonstrates failed leadership on the part of government and the ministry in particular. The leader of majority, Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, not many days ago described the PS education bitok as the most clueless human being in a current bureaucratic setup. And nothing can be further from the truth. The PS is issuing that particular circular or memo today when the grade 10 students have already reported to schools. If it's a matter of exploitation, they have already been exploited. They have already paid. And this is something that the PS ought to have set to address last year, even before the grade 9 results were read out. And I want to agree with the spirit of his statement and condemn the manner and the timing. Why are we, and just I can tell you for free, and parents will bear witness, that the cost of joining alone is higher than the school fees in that particular school. You will get that the cost of fees is about 15,000. Go to a school like Butere Girls National School. They'll tell you you have to buy 3 skirts, you have to buy a uniform for the weekend, you have to buy uniform for Sunday, you have to buy kits for clubs,
Sports,
kits for sports. So dressing alone, it takes you 15 to 20,000. And then you go for a mattress, and so you have to buy like color, bed sheets, and so forth. You spend another 10,000. That is 25,000. And then you have to pay for associations. If you're a Catholic, you have a Catholic association. We have club this, we have club that. We have prearranged trips. So you end up paying about 40,000 for the cost of the items you require to join grade 10.
Yeah.
And then the fees for term 1 is about 25,000. That brings to 65,000. And then during your first parents' meeting in school, you are told in this school, we had purpose to purchase a bus. You know, grade 10s have not contributed to this bus. So every learner should take 10,000, should pay 10,000. In the same meeting, you are told, we have academic programs for grade 10. We will be teaching you odd hours and over the weekends. You have to pay another 10,000.
Tuition fee.
So what is making the cost of education very high may not necessarily be fees, but the innovation by the school managers to get extra funds to run schools because government has not been sending capitation. I don't condemn the principals and take offense in what they're doing, because it is through such charges that they are sustaining the school programs. If they were to rely on government funding and they believe that the education is free, then they'll not be able to run the school even for a week. Because government has chosen to without missing the targets, I think principals are flying without patching, so that if they patch, government stone will get them. But if government were to fund education fundamentally and fully, it will be at liberty to implement what Bitok is saying. Bitok is unable to implement directive on school uniform, directive on extra charges, because at the back of his heart, he knows that he has not discharged his mandate as a PS in terms of releasing the capitation they're supposed to go to school in its fullness and on time.
Okay, well, you sort of feel for the principals. They're between a rock and a hard place. Since you've mentioned the PS and his character came into question, what is one policy shift that you would demand immediately from the Ministry of Education and the structure therein to at least save this grade 10 from becoming a lost cohort? Because this initial group has really faced a tumultuous time, whether it was the initial transition, whether it's this one. The first cohort is simply, let's see what happens, we're trying, we're testing. What policy shift would you advise?
What I will do, I would devolve power, especially from the ministry, devolve it from Jogo back to the ground, back to the counties and sub-counties. It is the sub-county directors and the county directors who have a feel of how the policies of the Ministry of Education are affecting lands. At Jogo, Bitok visits Alliance Boys, then goes to Mangu, then goes to Moi Eldoret. If he travels far, goes to Kakamega High. You know, he's traveling in heaven. He has not been on earth to witness how schools like Haunga, schools like Kajiado Day Mixed are operating. And therefore, the policy is out of touch with the common learning in a common school. And we've had professors in this ministry, Professor George Saitoti, who also understood the language of the common learner and the common man, because they were able to draft policy from the mindset of the parent on the ground, not from the mindset of the officials seated at Jogo floor 10. If you do policy from Jogo House and you do not go to the ground to see how this policy is likely to affect the outcome of education, then you have failed. The policy shift should be, we should stop making policy from the comforts of offices, but policy should be a culmination of extensive consultations between stakeholders from the ground, not from the up. We should have the bottom-up kind of policy making, but what we're witnessing today is up-bottom kind of policy making.
Okay, and we focused heavily on the challenges. Are there any hits? Categorization of schools or the assessment models, have they worked in any capacity, or is the entire system or the rollout a miss in your view?
The categorization of schools is a miss. William Shakespeare says, what is in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name will smell as same. If you call Alliance C1, it is still national school. We've seen parents still struggling to take their girls to Pangani. We've seen parents going for Alliance in Mangu because they are still national. In fact, parents do not understand the C naming, the C language of our schools. They just know we have national schools, we have extra county schools, county schools, and sub-county schools, which are day schools. So that naming did not help. What would have helped, in my view, is rebranding the C4 schools, giving them more infrastructural capacity, equipping them with the required things to implement CBC. So that let the structure of the building rebrand the school and call it C1. That this is a fully equipped school, and because it is in the village, we call it C1. We're not calling it C1 because of abilities. The current categorization is actually based on the school abilities, the development, and its infrastructural outlook. The hits that we have, and we must appreciate, is that CBC, in terms of subject and path categorization, is a very good hit. Why am I saying so? Students can now either belong to STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or they can be social science, or they can go to sports and arts. The beauty about this is that learners do not have the burden of being taken through a hard system if they wanted to take other things. For instance, I am an advocate of the High Court today. I do not seriously understand why my math teacher had to teach me vectors and matrix, things that gave me nightmares, but I do not use them.
You haven't
today.
applied them.
And in law, we've never studied mathematics. The only mathematics you meet is at Kenya School of Mathematics of constructing a trial balance, which you can just learn. So that thing of mathematics, if I had been a student under CBC, I would have gone for essential mathematics. But they had to take my little head through the core mathematics of 844 that would have made me run out of school. And many of my classmates at primary level left school because of mathematics. CBC has cured that. The only miss in that categorization of the path is that some of our teachers have not been fully retooled to understand the pathways and advise the learners accordingly. For instance, today, we have teachers who think that once a student has joined STEM, that student must be a doctor, that student must be a nurse, engineer. That is not the correct position. You can join STEM and end up being an advocate like myself. Because what is required for law is either English or Kiswahili, which are taught as compulsories under the 4 compulsory subjects. Teachers have been telling learners in some schools that once you go to sports and arts, you ought to become a DJ or a journalist. That is far from the truth. You can go to sports and arts and still become an advocate, still become an accountant. Because students in sports and arts can actually take core mathematics as an elective under STEM and go and take English as a compulsory and literature as an optional, and thus will become a journalist. And he will be very useful in reporting sporting activities as a journalist. So the miss there is that we must equip our teachers fundamentally to understand the paths of CBC so that they sell the learners the correct gospel. The miss that we have in CBC again is how equipped are our schools in terms of human resource. We have to teach aviation. We have to teach woodwork. We have to teach art and design. Many universities today are not training such teachers, and many schools today are not training such teachers. I am the board chair of St. Anne's Msoli Girls in Ikolomani, Kakamega South. We are teaching aviation, but because we are an innovative board, innovative school, we have partnered with Musingu Boys so that their teacher of aviation will come and teach our 4 to 5 girls who want to pursue aviation. So schools will have to be innovative and share human resource. Those are the things that BTOC should be thinking of, how schools can create MOUs between themselves to share the limited human resource in technical subjects that are very essential but have no persons to teach.
Well, you've talked about the human resource, but there's still that challenge, that gap when it comes to infrastructure and the support systems? Because it seems it's quite clear that the needs outweigh the resources that are there. So when we have a student who's admitted to the STEM pathway in perhaps a sub-county school that does not have a single functional science laboratory, are we essentially lying to these children by promising a technical education that schools cannot physically deliver? How do we ensure that the learner is not lost along the way? Because education is the greatest equalizer, as they say.
Unfortunately, we are left to be at the mercy of a government. It is the responsibility of government to provide education because every child is entitled to right to education. And this education is not just education, it must be quality education. It must be accessible to all, it must be affordable, and it should be flexible to reflect the needs of the society. What government is focusing on as we speak and over years is the accessibility to basic education. And they are treating accessibility as the only essential element of the right to education. And that's why you can see a president saying, let children go to school even if they have no uniform, even if they have no school fees. Yeah. The president and the government are not concerned about the quality of that education. For them, once you are in school compound, you've gone to class, whether you will be taught or not, whether you will be taught well, whether it's available, it doesn't bother them. Look at the capitation, and the capitation is mainly required to facilitate tuition. Tuition means to facilitate the instructional materials in terms of the delivery of the content. But if capitation is not going to school, then government has stopped supporting tuition programs. So what we get in school is lunch. And basically, we have a government that is pushing children to school to just take lunch and grow. Because provision of tuition materials is the core responsibility of government, and that is why we say that we have free and compulsory basic education.
When it comes to supply of textbooks, and we hear there's a delay in distribution of this essential books, how exactly do we that way? Because it's a net effect. If you don't pay the suppliers leave at this time round, and they're still waiting for needs to be paid. Yeah.
What is the history of book supply in this country? I remember that when I was in school, and somewhere until 2013, government used to send money to schools so that schools would acquire textbooks that were relevant and in the required quantities. But when Matiang'i became the CS for education, and through his own administrative innovation, he said that monies that were going to schools for the purchase of textbooks were going to waste. And therefore that money should be retained by the ministry so that the ministry supplies textbooks. And that is what produced the textbook cartels at Jogoo House. So they retain the capitation money meant for the textbooks per student at Jogoo House. They source for the suppliers themselves, or the printers, and then they supply these textbooks. You will realize that in junior secondary schools, for example, learners we've had more textbooks than learners in some of the classes. A learner has 2 textbooks of the same content. It's because the more copies that are produced at Jogoo House, the more money the cartels at Jogoo make in terms of the production. And some of those fellas, characters at Jogoo House, are the ones that are owning printing farms. Now we've gone to senior secondary. We are in the 3rd or the 4th week today. They have not supplied textbooks. They indicated that last week, Friday, they will start supplying to schools 3 weeks after learners had reported. And we knew 10 years ago that we'll have grade 10 in 2026. And government knew, so why the delay if the delay is not deliberate with the view of profiting a few individuals who are in the business of making money through the textbook cartelism? It is the principals of schools who know the essential needs in terms of textbooks. which textbooks are relevant. Of course, KICD approves all textbooks. We also have support textbooks. Education is an expansive area. Teaching is about research. You need not limit a teacher like me to KICD approved books. KICD is not a monopoly, has no monopoly over knowledge. We have textbooks that I could recommend. Other than being an advocate, I am a teacher of English language and literature in English. And I would want my learners to read John Kiriamiti's My Life in Crime, the minister's daughter, the girl who was mine, and so forth and so on. But KICD wants to limit us to a particular syllabus and narrow our thinking and our ability to do research. It is high time the Ministry of Education considers taking back the textbook money to schools and make the head teachers accountable. You cannot take textbook money around 2,000 from head teachers and tell them, we know you are thieves, you can't manage this, let us supply. And the same head teachers, you are giving them over 10,000 to run tuition programs. So what tells you that if they can eat 2,000, they can't eat 10,000? So
but
the ministry, yes.
Wasn't there an issue about non-existent schools receiving capitation? If we take it back to the schools, when this non-existent schools, if they're still there after the audit report was done.
Let me ask you, Jesse.
Yeah.
Who gives capitation? Government.
Yeah.
So it is government that gives to ghost schools. Why can't government just stop giving money to ghost schools?
Simple, yeah.
No one from, and by the way, ghost schools do not have head teachers, do not have principals. The principals of ghost schools, their working station is at Jogo House in Nairobi. They fill their own returns, give themselves money, withdraw the money, and spend. Otherwise, have you ever seen a convicted principal of a ghost school? Who signs these documents before capitation goes to ghost schools? We are unable to get these criminals because people are investigating themselves at Jogo House. And the principles that exist are physical principles in schools, in Mombasa, in schools in Malindi, and other areas. So why should we punish them? Because a few people have registered ghost schools and are getting government capitation. It is very easy. Just know from Jogo, where did this money go? It is to this school. Was the school registered? No. Who was the authorizing officer? Who gave this number of students? Because every document at Jogo House is signed by an individual. It is endorsed by the sub-county director, is further endorsed by the county director, regional director, before being sent to Jogo House. So every single document pertaining to one school has about 6 signatures. And we see government crying that we have ghost schools, but we do not see convictions of these ghost principles that facilitate this theft. So it is government stealing from itself.
And what does real action look like? If we're meant to read these corruption cartels that are taking advantage of public money to use for their own benefit, how exactly will we leave a lasting impact if we are to put the student, the learners first? Yeah.
We require a responsible leadership. And I went to school lucky enough during the last days of Moi and the better days of Kibaki. Remember that during Kibaki's time, ministers who were corrupt were actually impeached. Amos Kimunya was impeached. Professor George Saitoti was forced to resign at one point. Chris Murungaro resigned. It's because they had been mentioned in serious scandals. And everyone knew in civil service that if you are to involve yourself in a corrupt deal, then you will either be forced out by the executive or the parliament will call you out. Today, parliament is captured by the executive under what we call the state capture. Parliament is an extension of the executive. We see members of parliament taking instruction from State House. They cannot oversight the executive. They cannot call the CS for education to order. They can't call the PS to order. So we are operating in some justified, lawless society where the rich take everything and the weak have no defense. Today, for instance, if it were Kibaki's time, and we have a minister who is overseeing the funding of ghost schools, either Kibaki would have called him out to resign, or a functional parliament would have impeached that particular minister. nothing has happened. So the existing corruption is not because we cannot fight corruption. It's because we lack the will to fight corruption. We lack the lead to fight corruption. Who have we seen at the top fighting this vice so hard that even the principal who is at the bottom of the pyramid can say that I fear for my profession because my bosses are fighting this vice called corruption? What we see are individuals competing to eat and steal. We have these education officers from Jogo flying all over schools in terms of audit, and you'll be surprised that all schools in this country, at least 99%, have clean audit reports from the officers at Jogo who are in charge of audit. And you can be sure that those schools may not be as clean as they appear. And for your information, is actually the well-funded schools, national schools that have more capitation, that experiences more mismanagement. And it is in those schools that get clear bills in terms of audit. They have no audit queries. Those schools in the villages that do not get funds are the ones with audit issues. It is because the stronger schools in terms of capitation are able to oil back the hands of the officers at Jogo. So if I became the president today, what would I do to minimize corruption? Because the levels that we have is just to minimize before you completely eradicate it. I will dissolve Jogo House because it has been unable to contain the kind of corruption we witness in terms of basic education. Even at NEC, you know the results are released. A school today has 9.8. The same school next year, same teachers, will have 4.8. It's because a school has saved money to compromise the next system so that they get better results.
Are you serious? But the learners are different. Perhaps the
learners are different, capacities are different, but it cannot be different that they have a difference of 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we finalize, do you believe that the CBE system has improved the quality of education or delivered meaningful change?
It hasn't delivered meaningful change. Unless we change, it may not deliver meaningful change. And what we're going to witness is a wasted generation in the next 3, 6, or 10 years. Why am I saying so? CBC, by the way, is a very good curriculum. And I'll give the analogy of Jesse and myself. Of course, Jesse is a renowned journalist, flamboyant, rich. If we leave this show and we are to have a meal, you can't force me to accompany you to Stanley Hotel to have a meal. You go to your Stanley, let me go to River Road and have something that can hold my stomach so that we all get up tomorrow and come to work. But CBC, being Jesse, wants to force everyone in this room to go to Stanley Hotel and have what we call a balanced diet. And in this balanced diet, you are killing many people of hunger. We have schools where CBC is not going on. Schools where teachers are ill-equipped. Teachers are poorly retooled. A school that has no resources. A school that has no infrastructure. What is going on in terms of CBC? If you are taking music, for instance, and you have no music room. You are taking home science, you have no home science room. You are taking STEM, there's no single laboratory. The government has not released funds to buy chemicals. Then what are you doing? We are presiding over a generation that if 844 gave us half-baked generation, like people used to say, then CBC will give us people who have not been baked at all. We better have the half-baked of 844. But if we improve and resource this particular curriculum, let it enjoy the goodwill it deserves, let all the stakeholders participate through meaningful participation and engagement, then CBC had offered us an opportunity as a country to redeem ourselves in terms of the education that we offer.
Okay, well, it's work in progress. It's a first cohort joining grade 10. We hope we learn from our mistakes, because if you don't look in the past, you're bound to repeat some of the mistakes that occurred. KNHS, thank you so much for your time. Your input is greatly appreciated. As a teacher, a member of that profession, and equally a legal mind, it's proper to have your view from inside and from outside looking in, whichever way. Asante sana for your contribution. Well, we definitely hope for better things for the grade 10 learners, even as they await the distribution of textbooks, even as some fight the confusion confusion and face some of the household challenges when it comes to finding school fee to ensure that they do achieve that quality education. Well, that's a wrap for us right here on KTN Prime. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're adequately informed. My name is Jesse Rogers. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. Good evening.